Hey, everybody. Today we have for you podcast number 110. Today's podcast is titled, What Are You Not Seeing? Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of your weekly Limitless Life Network podcast. We are Dr. Pete and Sandy Lombardi, and this is the Limitless Life Network podcast where we flesh out the limitations that are preventing you from reaching your goals and living the life that you are called to lead. And we always start out the podcast with
much gratitude and thanks for all of the people that have commented and talked about what they took away from last week's podcast. So thank you. I had a couple people stop me this weekend, and that's always really encouraging. So we appreciate it. Give us ideas and suggestions.
Yeah, it's great. I love it. I love it. And I love the fact that Sandy's getting the feedback too now, because for quite a while I've been getting, feedback from people and just acknowledgement that they're listening. And it's even nicer for her to get some of that acknowledgement. And, it's not, we don't do it for acknowledgement, but we do it for you and we do it for the world to just spread goodness and hope and some really, just putting out some good positive vibes so that, we can help, serve better. So anyway, we came up with a great show again today. It's entitled, What Are You Not Seeing? And the backstory really comes from a couple of places, but really Sandy's been reading the book Hillbilly Elegy, which is really a story about J.D. Vance's upbringing.
Right. It's about his upbringing, memoirs, if you would. But and he gets into making some points about the poor white community and struggles of that socioeconomic group. So it's been interesting.
Yeah, I watched the movie on Netflix, and it's never the same as the book, right?
Right, there's more in the book.
Whether you read the book or you watch the movie, I think it's worth checking out. The movie is entertaining, but it's also like enlightening too of that, what's going on in that neck of the woods, right? So.
Just to alert them, the documentary is kind of crude. There's a lot of rough language, which it was realistic of what his home life was like. But
right, yeah, good. All right,
and then you also were watching with Dave Ramsey this morning.
Yeah, this morning, or actually yesterday, Josh Lewis, my good buddy and trainer, sent me a link to listen to this podcast, and whenever Josh sends me a link, I always listen to what he sends me because. It's always good stuff. And it's an interview with Dave Ramsey. And if you're not familiar with who Dave Ramsey is, but he's really been helping people get out of debt for, decades. And he just has a good formula for that. But the interview was great. It was enlightening on many, many levels. So I just took one point from that. So we'll share that with you as well. So let's get on with the show, as we say. So the first one is seeing beyond what you expect of yourself. What do you have there, Sandy?
That point came from the book. So this was part of J.D. Vance's, revelation and wake up when he went to Ohio. Well, first he went to the Marines and then serving overseas. Then he went on to Ohio State and then Yale Law. And he said when he got to Yale Law, he realized he really didn't know how the world worked. He knew his world, hillbilly, poverty. And so just interesting, like meeting people and understanding like the underworkings of successful people. And he said one thing that caught my attention in the book was that he never expected himself to be at Yale Law. So I thought that was something worth talking about. Like, what do we expect of ourselves? And have we even thought about it? Like, that's one thing I thought too. Like, how often do we think about at any point in our life, what do we expect of ourselves in this year, next year, 5 years, 10 years? What does that look like? And are we even planning it?
Yeah. I'm unfortunately, the majority of people don't think into the future. We're very focused on the now and the past, whereas the future, gosh, it takes a little bit of extra creativity to think and ahead, but an expectation is, it's a tough thing to talk about sometimes when you talk about with yourself. Like, what do you expect of yourself in the future? And if you don't think about it, then, it's going to be a lot more of the same story and maybe even less. But with higher expectations, your potential just goes up. If you lower the bar, then, well, you'll just barely probably get under, you'll keep squeaking under it, right?
And a lot of it, I think, too, especially with J.D. Vance's memoir, but for all of us, I think, like, what expectations does your family unit have on you, or your community even? Like, so for him, their expectation was extremely low. It would be just a factory job staying in the same town. It wasn't going to the Marines. It certainly wasn't going on to higher education. No one in his family went on to college, let alone Yale Law. So we can have these expectations that are, within our communities, within our family structure, that put a ceiling on us, and we may not even know that they're there.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I'm thinking of my own family, and my father, his expectations growing up were very minimal. He just wanted to get a job and feed himself, right? Like, because he grew up dirt poor, and they struggled to put food on the table. So the fact that when he got out of the service, that he had a piece of land that he could grow food, that was just like great, and that's all he ever expected of himself. And then he ended up going on to become a chiropractor, which was like beyond any wildest dreams of his. But because he did that, then his sister did the same. And then his other brother went on to be, a college professor. Like, all of a sudden the bar was raised because one person went beyond, right?
Yeah.
So if you have, and then, my own family, everybody went to college, and my father expected everybody to go to college. That was the expectation. So, yeah, it was pretty cool. Pretty cool. And just being exposed to what's possible. I think that's really what happened to J.D. Vance in that situation, was like, he became exposed to something that was beyond his wildest dreams. As a kid growing up, he never expected any of that. In the movie, I think his grandmother was expected more of him, though, because she saw something more in him.
Absolutely. And that was one of, I think, the driving forces of him writing the book, was to acknowledge the influence of his grandparents, and I guess how that other generation can really change the perspective and your outlook.
Yeah.
He would have never gotten where he had gotten if it weren't for them.
Sure.
Okay. Point number 2, mysterious force of networking. And this was also from the book. And in law school, he said, I never understood networking. And he was talking about how, like, for many of us, you want to find a job. Like, you either went in the newspaper in the old days, right? Or you go online and you look at job openings and you put your applications in. And he just talked about how that was a really kind of a failing system. It just kind of produced mediocre results, where he was starting, as he got into the law program and he had to get in for clerkships and different positions, he all of a sudden learned how networking worked. And it was who you knew and connections and getting in with different opportunities. And he said, if you don't understand that world, you're really operating at a disadvantage. And he talked about social capital and, connections with people. And so...
Yeah, well, I mean, so how does anybody apply that in their own life? Is that you, believe it or not, have a network of people around you. And for example, this past weekend, I actually tapped into my social network, my friends, and they helped me pull off something I couldn't have done on my own. We did a build up at our camp, and we built a garage slash house in 4 days with myself and three other guys. And if it wasn't for knowing people that have some level of skill and brute force, we would have never accomplished as much as we did in such a short period of time. So, and that's just one example. And if you want to accomplish something or to do something, whatever it might be in life, you're going to get there much faster and go much further if you have a network of people that you can call upon and to rely upon. And I just encourage you to not be afraid to ask, for one, and two, look to help somebody else first. And that's what it's really all about, is helping people. So, yeah. And so it brings us to point number 3, which is the value of a guidance counselor. And this was an interesting point, I think, too, because when we all think of guidance counselors, we think of like our school guidance counselor. And Sandy got this point out of the book here. So why don't you explain where you got that from?
Well, it kind of tied to the social capital. He said one of the key connections he made was with a professor who was kind of like his counselor there at Yale. And the most valuable piece of advice she gave him, he was applying to different clerkships, and he went after this prestigious route. And it was involving like a Supreme Court position. And she brought him in and said, just wondering why you're pushing so hard for this position. And she said, I don't see that it lines up with any of the values that you've told me about. Like, it's not the direction you said you wanted to head in law, and it doesn't line up with the relationships that you have right now. And so he said how valuable it was for her to like call him out on that so that he could really step back and reflect. He was just following kind of what the herd mentality was, like this was the most prestigious route to go, so that was the way he was headed. And he said not doing that helped shape the rest of his direction and future, and the profession, the way he went. So a lot of wisdom was spoken to him by that woman.
Yeah, wise counsel. That it's so important to like be open to it, because there are people in your life that really will offer you. They'll be able to see the things that you can't see yourself. Like not everything is a great idea, even though to you it might seem like a great idea. And I think that's where he was at this point. Is like he's like, wow, this is a great opportunity. It was, but just not for him. Right. And that happens to all of us, is that we get presented with so many opportunities sometimes that we think they're great, and they are, but maybe they aren't for you. And who's going to tell you that? Well, you need to have maybe your spouse who's looking out for your best interest. I mean, Sandy's definitely pulled me back off, from doing some things that maybe I wanted to jump forward and do. Maybe this isn't the right time. Maybe this isn't the right idea. And sometimes that's the case.
That's the case where you've done that. I tend to say yes to a lot of things, and you help me filter. Does this really serve, what you're passionate about or your purposes?
Right. And sometimes it's just stretching yourself too thin too. That's preventing you from burnout. So yeah, it's great to have somebody in your life that can give you good counsel, whether it's a friend, a family member, a coworker, a neighbor, a pastor, or whoever it might be, a parent, that can give you some wise counsel without bias. I think that's really important. So
number 4 is something that you came up with this morning, the broken window policy.
Yeah, this is actually, I got this from a different podcast. And it came from Rudy Giuliani when he cleaned up New York City. And he brought out what was called the broken window policy. And it wasn't his policy either, or he didn't come up with it, but he borrowed it and put it into play. And what he said was that, we need to go around and fix all the broken windows, because if you have a building with one broken window, well, that can lead or invite other vandals to come along and break another window. And if that goes unrepaired, then the next one. And now you have a building with multiple windows that are smashed out. And now it becomes like maybe that place isn't even empty or occupied. So now vagrants move in or homeless people move in. And it just invites more problems. And what he was saying is that, you know what, we've got to tighten things down. We've got to look at all these small things that we've been letting slide. And he got the police force involved in it too, and which means that they started handing out more violations or tickets for, like, say, parking issues, and they started to enforce them, and they started to, give people tickets for jaywalking, because if people felt the pressure from the small infractions, well, it discourages larger infractions. And so how does this apply in your own life? Well, it's a simple little things that you overlook that bring about other problems or other things that you end up overlooking. So, for instance, if you don't make your bed every day, you can get away with it and nobody notices except you, but you also don't get to reap the reward of, at the end of a tired day, to come home and lay down in a bed that's been freshly made, right? I know that if you were to let that slide, it doesn't seem like a big thing, but over time, next thing you know, the covers aren't even on the bed anymore.
Right.
and when's the last time you washed the sheets? And your environment gets worse and worse. And I think you were talking about that today with, what your friend was saying about the school system that she teaches in,
Yeah.
and how there's a lot of poverty now, and they go into these homes, and it's really sad because these people have kind of given up. And so they stop taking care of their own home environment, even though all it would take would be maybe vacuuming once a week. Instead, they don't vacuum at all anymore. They just keep walking over the filth. And it just adds up. Instead of, taking pride in the little things, you let that slide and it just turns into bigger problems.
Yeah. Well, and she's a teacher in the school district, and the effect on the children and their learning has just been unbelievable in the last 5 years. And, it's incremental, little steps, but if we address these small things, which seem small, but in the big picture, they make a difference, and I think of even like being on time, like doing what you say you're going to do. Like all of those things matter in a big picture of your outlook on the world.
Yeah, it speaks to integrity, like your own integrity, like when, keeping your word, staying on time. And it's like, it also is it's a psychological thing for yourself. When you clean your house and everything is in its place, it just feels better. You feel different about it. The more order there is in your life, well, it just makes life smoother, easier, and more simple. The more chaotic and dysfunctional your life is, well, guess what? That breeds more problems. There's more lost opportunities in those situations. So it spills over to your health, the same thing. Like as soon as you, kind of like say you're on this great diet and it's working really good, and then you slip one day, and then it's like, I cheated, I'm off the diet. I might as well just, next thing you know, you're eating Haagen-Dazs and candy bars, and you're totally off the rail because you let these little things add up to become bigger things. So, it's the broken window policy, So, yeah, good. That brings us to point number
5 is live on a plan.
Yeah. So I was sharing this podcast with Sandy of Dave Ramsey, and he touched on so many good things in the podcast, and she kind of drew this one out. He talked about the worst thing and the best thing.
Yeah. So he was talking about his bankruptcy very early on. I think he was 26, young, married. They just had their second daughter.
Yeah.
And anyway, went bankrupt. They were in real estate, flipping houses. I think he said he had $4 million in assets and maybe $3 million in debt, and just the bank called it in, and down they went. And he said that was the worst time in my life and the best time because of the lessons that he learned, and now that's driven his whole career.
Yeah, he said he said that he met God on the way down, and he got to know him on the way up.
Yep.
Which is pretty awesome. That you can easily lose hope in a situation like that. But that's all it takes is one little win to start giving you something back. And I think we talked about that a little bit in point number 4, with when you start to let so many things go, you lose hope. And that can happen. And it can seem like, wow, the city's just run down, and people get all negative about that instead of looking on the bright side of all the things that are really good. And you can start to gain hope back. And I believe that there's a scripture in the Bible about that, about I think it's Proverbs 13:12. So it speaks something about hope deferred. And I can't quote it off the top of my head, but basically what it's saying is that, if you don't have hope, then you just feel like, depressed and lousy and like nothing's ever going to get better. But all it takes is one win. It just takes a little of something for you to get in line with. And now you see there's a possibility now that there's a possibility to go in the right direction. And he talks about that with people's financial situation, is that most people that have credit card debt, which I think he said the average right now is like $30-something thousand that, we have, that the average, American has that much credit card debt or that much debt. So that's a lot of debt. And we're just leveraged up to the gills. And so people give up on trying to get out of debt, and we want to just have our loans forgiven and just let's forget about it and sweep it under the rug. But at the end of the day, it's horrible for the country. It's horrible for the economy. And he said the best thing you can do is just live on a plan. You've got to get a plan to get out of it. And a plan gives you hope. If you don't have a plan, then you're going to have a problem. And he talks about how these people will try to consolidate their loans and get a lower interest rate payment. And that's all well and good. But if you don't fix the problem, which is overspending and not living on a budget, you're just going to go back into the same problem again. So if you've never sat down and planned things out, then you're really just winging it. And winging it is not a great strategy.
One thing that Dave Ramsey spoke about was reputation. And there's so much around that word, but I appreciate him and his values and his value of reputation, and not in the terms of look at me, but reputation in terms of you took on this debt, you signed on the line, keep your reputation, like
keep your
figure
word.
out what it takes to pay it off the right way and do the right thing and not looking for someone else to bail you out. And I just thought that was a powerful part of the podcast.
Yeah, it really was. And he admits, when he went bankrupt, he was driving a car that, he got it, this expensive car, because he wanted the world to see how great he was. And yeah, it took him down, that when the bank sold to another bank and they called his notes, he lost it all. And he said it wasn't a pretty bankruptcy. It was not a politically correct one whatsoever. It was ugly, and it almost cost him everything, including his marriage. But it turned out good in the end. It turned out really good for him. So keep on keeping on. But most importantly, get a plan. Get a plan together. Whether it's for your health, whether it's for your finances, your business, your relationships. Put a plan together in place. If you have a system. Systems don't ever get tired. People get tired, but systems don't. So get a system in place and a plan, and maybe along the way you can get to know God better. If you haven't met him already, then you can certainly meet him along the way and hopefully get to know him even better. So that's all we have for this week's edition of your weekly Limitless Life Network podcast. Be sure to tune in each and every week to stay connected, be inspired, and keep moving toward your best life by stripping away your limitations. And we'll see you back next week.
Enjoy the sunshine.